This is Chapter 3, Business Statistics or Statistics Methods, Surveys and Sampling. So you, as students of this class, certainly most of you have done the surveys and understand what that is. Let's take a closer look at what they are, what it is in more details. So learning objectives here, we've got identified different ways of selecting samples, representative samples. Understand how to avoid bias. We talked about bias right through. I think I keep mentioning bias. So I think here it puts things in perspective. Explain terms such as population, sampling frame, and sample itself. So 3 principles of sampling. We'll start with that. So examine a part of the whole. So a sample survey is designed to ask questions of a small group of people in the hope of learning something about the entire population. So you have done this before, you know exactly what this is, and so let's look more into details about this and other principles of sampling. So samples that over or under emphasize some characteristics of the population are said to be biased. So when a sample is biased, the summary characteristics of a sample differ from the corresponding characteristics of the population it is trying to represent. So that means is we should select individuals for the sample at random as much as possible. So that's it. And principle 2 is certainly to randomize. So randomizing protects us by giving us a representative sample even for effects we were unaware of, and doesn't eliminate bias but certainly controls it. So randomization seems fair because nobody can guess the outcome before it happens, and because usually some underlying set of outcomes will be equally likely in this case. So sample to sample differences are referred to as sampling variability. Principle 3. The same size is what matters. The size of the sample determines what we can conclude from the data regardless of the size of the population. How big a sample do we need? It depends on what we are estimating, right? So too small sample size may not be representative of the population. Certainly the ones we have or we do are really just real samples, and yes, they cannot be representative of the population. When we do a sample of 20 or a survey of 20, it is not enough to have any kind of conclusion. So does it make sense? A census, a sample that includes the entire population is called a census. So a census might not always provide the best possible information about the population, but it can give you a lot of insights on the actual population itself. It can be difficult and it can be difficult and impractical to complete a census. That the population we're studying, we might look at, certainly will change. And taking a census certainly can be cumbersome, and a lot of people of the population of a country, let's say Canada or otherwise, will not feel at ease to answer certain questions in a census. So populations and parameters. Sample data is used to estimate values for population parameter. So any quantity that we can calculate from data is a statistic. In practice, we usually obtain a statistic from a sample. So sometimes, especially when we match statistics with the parameters they estimate, we use the term sample statistic for the former. So we hope that the statistics we compute from a sample will estimate the corresponding population parameters accurately. So a sample that does this is said to be a representative sample. Let's look at SRS, simple random sample. So a sample drawn so that every possible sample at the size we plan to draw has an equal chance of being selected is called an SRS, a simple random sample. So with this method, each person has an equal chance of being selected. So to select a sample at random, a sampling frame is first have to be defined. So a sampling frame is a list of individuals from which the sample will be drawn. So once we have a sampling frame, we can assign a sequential number to each individual in a sampling frame and draw random numbers to identify those to be sampled. So samples drawn at random generally differ one from another, and these differences lead to different values for variables we measure. So sample to sample differences in the values for variables we measure are called sampling variability. We look at the more complicated sample designs may save time or money or avert sampling problems. So all statistical sampling designs have in common that chance rather than human choice is used to select a sample. So here are other random sample designs: stratified sampling, cluster sampling, systematic sampling, and multi-stage sampling. So let's look at stratified sampling. This is a slice of the population in homogeneous groups called strata. So use simple random sampling within each stratum to select members. Combine the results at the end. So this is called stratified random sampling, right? So slice the population into groups, homogeneous groups called strata, and then use simple random sampling within each of these groups to select members. And then you combine the results at the end. So you basically make groups, choose from those groups, and then put them back together. Cluster sampling: split the population into parts or clusters, with each representing the wide variety of individuals seen in the population. So in a cluster, all look pretty much alike, and you need to select some clusters at random. So choose a random sample within those that are selected. This is a cluster sample. Systematic sampling. A systematic sample is created by selecting individuals systematically. So to make sure our sample is random, we still must start the systematic selection with a randomly selected individual. For example, select every 10th individual on an alphabetical list of employees. So you have a system, you're choosing every 10, but they're still random. Then you have multi-stage sampling. Sampling schemes that combine several methods are called multi-stage sampling.